the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Have you noticed anything?
Yes.
You're not looking at it. I suspect that she has been caught in the traffic, so if a rather frazzled person runs through the door, perhaps she can speak to you after the service, otherwise you can contact her later. There's some wonderful sayings in our language which most of us, I suspect, were brought up with. Sayings like, you don't carry coals to Newcastle, there's no smoke without fire, can a leopard change its spots? I suspect in reading tonight today, it's will you walk the extra mile, will you go the extra mile? The interesting thing though is that some of those sayings are now no longer valid. I was driving along the seafront a couple of years ago and I heard the local radio saying, actually they've started importing coals to Newcastle. The economy there is such that it's cheaper to actually bring it in from other countries. So you don't carry coals to Newcastle, doesn't seem to hold very much water anymore. What about there's no smoke without fire? Well, I suppose there are so many of the nattering middle classes now that they have realised that if you create a rumour and you create the appearance of smoke, that people will believe there's some substance to that rumour, that they will believe there's some fire. Unfortunately for me, I no longer believe rumours. I listen to them and then try and find out if they're true. 9 times out of 10, I'm afraid they're not. But there's no smoke without fire doesn't seem to be as true as many here. But what about this one about going the extra mile? We've heard an awful lot about what we can do to go that extra mile, and it all seems very simple. But is it now one of those things that perhaps we oughtn't to listen to because we're living in a modern world, and a modern world doesn't need such simplistic sayings or guidances? Well, obviously I believe it does, and obviously I believe we should walk the extra mile. So why do we not do it? What gets in the way? Well, I think there are 3 things that get in the way. The first one is our own inability sometimes to see that either we're being judgmental, or that we're sticking to our guns and not listening to other people, or that we're actually absolutely convinced that everyone else is wrong. When I was young and naive, and I was in my first parish, I wanted to preach a sermon, and everyone had been saying to me, well, these 2 old ladies do not get on, and they say some really pretty nasty things about each other. And it is true, having visited both of the old ladies, they did not get on, and they said some really choice things about each other. So I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to get up in the pulpit and I'm going to say something about unity and love and all those other things. And I stood there and I preached, and as I came down I thought, these 2 old ladies are going to really dislike me now. And as I'm standing at the door at the end, I will be told off. And each of them came up to me and shook me warmly by the hand and said, you're so right, if only she would actually. Isn't it true sometimes, though, that we're so convinced of our own righteousness, we actually hear everything the way we want to hear it in support of ourselves, and we never quite know that the other person may have got it right. It's our own predilection to believe that we're right that sometimes gets in the way of walking that extra mile. The other things, 2 other things, one of them is we've got to actually believe that walking the extra mile is worthwhile. I've been to 2 places where people used to get burnt on the stake, one in Oxford and one in Rouen. And the local publicity is quite interesting. It will tell you in vivid detail what it meant to be burned on a stake. An average burning could last for half an hour. So someone could actually struggle through that burning through half an hour. And apparently, if the wind was blowing, it would spatter over all the buildings. So the buildings around are spattered with people fat. Not very nice sort of thoughts, are they really? And if people were being merciful, you could be garroted first, so you could have your head blown off with a little bit of gunpowder. And if you were being really merciful, they'd drown you because it was quicker. Now, we ask ourselves, what's that all about? And sometimes we giggle behind our hands and say, well, it wouldn't happen now because we're so civilized. It wouldn't happen because we know better. Those people were old in the Middle Ages or whenever, and they didn't know any better. Well, interestingly enough, if you actually look at what they were doing and what they were saying, Something quite different from rather barbaric and vulgar people comes out. What they were saying is, and what they believed is, that in actual fact you couldn't actually change your nature. So somebody who had been bad and murdered or stolen or done all those things, you couldn't actually do anything to change them. Once they'd revealed that they were a murderer, then they would murder again. So it was pointless actually trying to teach them to be better people. So what did you do with them? For their own sake you had to deal with the problem. So if they stole, chop off their hand, then they couldn't do it again. If they were murderous and likely to do it again, then burn them, get rid of them, so that they couldn't be a damage to society, or indeed a damage to themselves. The more murders they committed, the more likely they were to go, well, the more crimes they committed, the more likely they were to go to hell. So it was, both in terms of the law and in terms of the church and theology, a good thing to actually help people by burning them or drowning them. It was a strong belief that people could not be changed. Now we have to ask ourselves today, in walking the extra mile, do we believe that people can actually change? Is it worth putting the effort in? Is it worth going the extra mile? Now I hope that today we listen to Jesus and God, who says he calls on us to be compassionate. He calls on us to demonstrate love. He asks us to walk that extra mile. Our inspiration, our calling, is actually to have faith in the fact that we can change the way people behave, that they can have a second chance. What's the point of confession and coming up and saying, Lord, forgive us, and having absolution if we don't believe that people can change? If people can change, we have to give them that opportunity, but we so very often don't want to. A leopard can't change its spots. No one's going to change in this instance. Well, I would say to you, we are called upon to give people an extra chance. No matter how much they've hurt us, no matter how much they've done things that we disapprove of, we still have to have in our hearts the belief that they can change, that they can be someone else. Our belief in other people sometimes, or our lack of belief, stands in the way of going the extra mile. And a third thought. We were at our quiet day the other day, and we were considering that we were part of God's creation, that we were loved by God, and that we were called by God to be all that we could be. And then we looked at what sort of aspirations modern society had, what sort of aspirations the church and Christians should have. And on the side of society, we said that very often the images that are created, which we are expected to follow, aren't that good. So we're expected to have lots of money, we're expected to be stylish, have lots of friends, we're expected to be successful. And we looked at those and we said, well, why is it so bad to be stylish and successful and have lots of money? And we said, well, maybe there's a gap in our lives that no one can fill. And we went through all the pros and cons, and we had quite a lengthy debate. And then on the other side, we drew up what was to be the aspirations of a good Christian. That was a much shorter piece. And the discussion wasn't that long either, because at the end of the day, it's all relatively simple. It's simple to say we should love one another, we should go the extra mile, we should nurture people and care for people. The trouble is, we don't always do it. Everyone heard of Paradise Lost? John Milton? Anyone heard of Paradise Regained? Also by John Milton, much smaller book. It's so much easier to get taken up in modern problems, buy into them, believe in them, or if we don't believe in them, at least enter into the debate. It sounds far more interesting than actually saying, principally, we should be being good people and looking after each other. We're asked to go that extra mile. We're given lots of examples in those readings of going the extra mile. Don't be gossips. Actually, make sure that you have enough to give for charity. All sorts of things are mentioned in those readings today. What gets in the way? Well, sometimes we believe too much the images which are put out by modern society that we shouldn't be. That in some way by doing this we're being weak people. And even if we don't believe that, we're so taken up in the debate that we forget to do the simple good things. Also, what gets in the way is that, yes, sometimes we just do not believe some people can change. We're told they can. Even now, modern society believes that we can, that people can be changed. But in our hearts of hearts, do we behave like that to our fellow human beings? And finally, what gets in the way are our own egos. Are we such people that in actual fact we can't stand back and say, occasionally I am wrong. Occasionally, I need to listen to the other person. It's an interesting call to walk the other mile, and so much has been lost in our society. So many of those old sayings seem to have been debased. Is this one debased as well? The answer is it's up to us to make it a reality, to walk that extra mile. Lots of reasons that we don't do it seems very simple if we put our minds to it. Amen.